looking at resources like the Canadian Handbook of Practice for Architects, which is by the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. There are definitions for certain things that are quite important. One of the elements that we're giving quite a bit of emphasis on is the building business case and feasibility study. These are elements that are considered that ought to be considered within the pre-design phase. So a business case being establishing the merits of the project, including elements like anything that's going to further rationalize the project and lead to kind of further development of it. And feasibility studies being research and subsequent analysis to determine the viability of that project, which would include your financial, your market, your regulatory, and your technical elements, of which is a fairly difficult element to it's a difficult content, but it's one of those fundamental building blocks that you start with. The pre-design services that we're coming from the architectural profession, and the pre-design services that architects would be providing are architectural services provided prior to the schematic design when you're starting to design the actual building itself. So the goal is to give a functional program, project scope, including financial and scheduling plan. So it's all about this planning phase. Generally speaking, the purpose of this phase is to consider with the client and with your consultant team where you're going to get the information for your site, your capital assets, your program, procurement methods, design, construction, operation, and several other things. But these are some of the big ones that we've been kind of looking at, specifically site, assets. In the future, we'll be looking at program. Some of the design implications within design, construction, and operation when it comes to actually providing services within an affordable housing project. There are some kind of general rules of thumb that can be abided by, but when it comes to specific projects, you kind of have to take every project as a unique thing. So what we're trying to introduce here are the general phases that you do within this kind of pre-design and the services that are provided. So this is a big long list of common services. This is just from the RAIC and from that CHOP handbook. I'll just read through them and then we can kind of highlight some of the services that I think are more important for this group. So that business case and feasibility studies, project budgeting and cost planning, life cycle cost studies, functional programming. So what is actually going in the space, space planning and optimization. So how do you create something that's designed in an optimized way? How do you reduce costs? How do you plan the physical spaces of the design? Operational and business planning being different from the costs of your construction, the cost of your design, site evaluation and site selection, master planning and urban design, how it fits into the fabric, building condition assessments, the opportunity for maybe expanding an existing facility, project management framework. So how you're actually going forward, what's your schedule, and what is the framework of, framework of the project, even though that's kind of implied in the name. Coordination of data from the client, project scheduling, the authorities having jurisdiction, so you're consulting your review and your approvals, land use analysis and rezoning assistance, which we've kind of gotten into a little bit, building code and fire safety analysis, presentations and project promotions, and design competitions, potentially design competitions, briefs for proposals, calls for documentation, and kind of that answering of the RFP. So that's a whole long list. We won't be able to get through everything for every project in a list like that, but looking at project budgeting and cost planning, functional programming, site evaluation and selection, land use analysis and rezoning assistance, and a presentation and project promotion. These are elements that are both important to the projects that we've kind of been talking about thus far, but also something that we can give an overview of and an introduction to, so that when any of you organizations or any of the future organizations that are looking through the toolkit that we're kind of compiling workshop by workshop, we'll be able to quickly go and use those resources to access information, to figure out what it actually is that they need. If they needed a project schedule, that's their stumbling block, or they needed building code and fire safety analysis, that's kind of their block, that's their stumbling block. And as we go through the red highlighted elements in introductions, there's going to be inevitably overlap between your business cases, your space planning, project managements, your project scheduling, and elements like that. These are interlinked, and while some organizations will be able to address some of these very, very seamlessly, others will have a really hard time getting into the brass tacks of one or the other elements. So the resource, and just due to time, by all this work, the resource that we were trying to provide is to avoid and I know I've said this before, but to avoid going forward in a project, having to do loops, as I referred to it before, but in particular, going forward and then realizing that you have gone along a risky path, or you have not mitigated potential risks by setting that firm foundation as you go forward. So this quote from the Royal Architect Institute: strategic thinking that is informed by decision-making, having a positive impact on the project quality, cost, and schedule. Clients that invest in integrated early design will realize increased value by significantly reducing the risk of project shortfalls. This is the Michelini curve, and what you see basically on this axis is your low impact, your high impact of your decision making. And as you see, it kind of decreases down as you go forward in time. This being, and pardon, it's probably fairly slow, the pre-design phase, this being the conception design phase. And then you get into really designing the project. And at that point, there's sort of lower and lower impact of the decisions that you're collectively making, versus a few of those decisions right at the start being really quite critical. As you can see, when you're making those changes right at the very start of the project, figuring out, is this going to be big? Is it going to be small? Is it going to provide services? Is it not going to provide services? At the pre-design stage, which the various groups are at, the costs, the relative costs of those changes is fairly small. But as you go further along, where's my mouse? As you go further along and you get more and more information, more and more compiled work and compiled layered decisions, that cost will increase, and it increases not linearly, it increases exponentially. So putting in the time right at the start to really nail down, for instance, the project charter can pay dividends, especially when moving forward with approaching, be it politicians or other developers for partnerships, or just moving forward with your own initiative and using funding that you have acquired to use that funding strategically. The goal is to have a firm foundation and decrease the costs that you're spending on changes in the future. So what will be circulated is additional material. So this is the handbook. It's a lot of information, but it's a resource from the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada to give an understanding of what these phases are involve. Not all projects are exactly the same, but this is a pretty good direction for how these projects go forward, because they go from an ideation to planning, to conceptual design, and to design, and then to construction before you move in. That's what's going to happen in any of these projects. So looking at this, I'm not quite sure if you can still see my screen. There we go. So this would just be the website, which has a variety of different resources within it to get an understanding, or again, to quickly go and find the information that you need right there quite quickly. Not all this stuff is straightforward and easy to just Google. So often you do need to go and find the resources and search through, the reliable, credible sources to find answers that you can then use moving forward so that your assumptions are correct.